morning's panel discussion on NSF funding. We'll be discussing the NSF application and post-award process and what postdocs and graduate students can do to make their applications stand out. Our panelists are Catherine Franz, Associate Professor of Chemistry and NSF Reviewer, Ezra Miller, Professor of Mathematics and Associate Director of Statistical and Applied Mathematical Sciences Institute and NSF Reviewer, Jim Cito, Vice Provost for Research and Professor of Biology and former NSF Program Director, and John Willis, Professor of Biology and NSF Reviewer. And we really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come here today. We will be starting. I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves and briefly describe their backgrounds and their NSF duties. And then we'll start with questions. Many of you submitted questions in advance. Thank you for that. So we'll start with those, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So, one of you like to start, just giving a brief background?
So I'm John Willis, and I'm in the Department of Biology. I've been here at Duke since, I guess, 2000, and before that I was a faculty member at University of Oregon. My area of research is plant evolutionary genetics, and I've been interacting with NSF ever since I was a graduate student and getting graduate support. So I've gotten NSF grants, but I've also reviewed them as an ad hoc reviewer, and I've been on lots and lots of panels and also NSF workshops and discussions about the review process and things like that.
I'm Jim Cito. I'm, as you said, the Vice Provost for Research and also a Professor of Biology. I came to Duke before most of you were born, probably, 1976. So I've been here a long time, and then in the late 1990s, 1998 to 99 time frame, I was asked to come up and spend a year as a rotating program director for a program at NSF in the biology director called cellular biochemistry. And I too also, in the interim, in the various times in between, I've served on many NSF panels and as an ad hoc reviewer. That's my reason for being here.
Hi, I'm Ezra Miller. I'm a professor in the math department at Duke. I came here in 2009. I was at University of Minnesota for about 6 years before that. I have been awarded NSF grants, and I've served on panels, for faculty grants, for career grants, I've also reviewed some of the group grants, like research training groups and focused research groups, these kinds of things. I've, like John, been involved with NSF since already, applied for a graduate fellowship. Did not get one, but got
I didn't either. I got a dissertation improvement grant.
Okay. Yeah, and I got a postdoc grant. So anyway, I've seen the process from all sides.
I'm Catherine Franz, and I'm in the Department of Chemistry. I've been here since 2003. I've had a couple of NSF grants. NSF Career Works, one of the first federal grants, and I imagine, as you all are embarking on a potential faculty career, that's one program that you'll be looking at. And as everyone else here, I've also been on several NSF panel reviews and ad hoc reviews where you read them alone in your office and then write reports and send them back in without the discussion that the panels have. So different kinds of reviewing, and I imagine that's something that we'll get in the plans and that is student discussion.
Just one thing to add, the way that the people get chosen for these kinds of things is typically, once you're awarded grants, the cover letter says, now that you've been awarded the grant, we're probably from time to time going to ask you to help review our grants.
It comes in about 2 weeks after you get noticed.
So yeah, that actually opened up the next question, what your responsibilities are as an NSF reviewer. Is there just one type of grant that you review, or do you review all of them?
Whatever they throw at you. Once you're on once the sort of program directors are aware of your presence, they'll send you grants that they think are up your alley for subject, and if they think you have the experience to be able to give a competent review, then they'll send it to you.
This is very much a networking thing. Once you get sort of identified, and other people in the community recommend you to do reviews, or older faculty members say, I don't want to do this, but I know this young faculty member who's eager to be on a review panel. So it really is a way to try to get yourself into that. So one of my first opportunities was actually as a postdoc, where I was at some senior faculty members in my department I had some opportunity to be on that was a SBIR grant review session, which really I got no business being on, sort of small business. But they thought that, okay, that topic that I was somehow qualified, and they put my name in, and that starts that kind of networking. So it is something to think about, to try to press your mentors if they see an opportunity and they think you might be the right person, because you get a window that is pretty unique. So that's just to keep your eyes open for those opportunities and try to insert yourself in there if it comes up.
They're really looking for people too, because over the course of time, it's become, when they send the proposal out for someone to review, that's known as an ad hoc reviewer, and they have to, at least within the biology directorate, they want no fewer than 2 ad hoc reviews to go along with the panel members that will review the proposal. And they are nowadays having to send out 6 to 7 requests for ad hoc reviewing before they'll get to. So this is viewed up at NSF as something of a crisis actually right now, getting good reviewers. So they're always on the lookout.
And I might add that that really has become a crisis at NSF. In the biology directorate, at least, there are alternative ways, or there's a new procedure in place for division of environmental biology and also integrated organism. So the way the rest of NSF works is that when you want to apply for a grant, you would write this 15-page proposal and submit it on the deadline, or before the deadline, and then NSF would just get all of these grants and they'd start farming them out for reviews. Well, it became such a crisis in getting ad hoc reviews in these 2 sections that they decided to have this alternative procedure where now the first step, you don't submit a full proposal, you submit a short 4-page pre-proposal, and then those are evaluated by a panel. They're not sent out for ad hoc review, and the panel then selects a subset of those, maybe 20% or something like that, to invite those investigators to write a full proposal and submit it 6 months later, and then those are sent out for ad hoc reviews as well as panels. So for those 2 parts of NSF, instead of being able to submit twice a year, you're really only able to submit once a year. And there's this 2-step process that's really a pain in the neck.
In math, you really can only submit once a year anyway, because each program has 1 date per year that you can submit.
Okay.
And but there are they don't require ad hoc reviewers, so the panel. So each panel has enough people so that there are at least 3 panelists who read the individual proposal, and then so there's 3 already written reports by the time you get to the panel discussion, and then the panel discusses the proposal and also the 3 reports that have already been written about it, and then they write a panel summary. And sometimes the panel summary can differ from the individual reports written by the individual panelists, because sometimes something comes up during the panel, someone points out that the discussion sort of resolves an issue that was not so clear from the individual reports.
Kathy, doesn't chemistry, the chemistry director works in the 3rd window, don't they?
Well, we now just have 1 window, 1 submission window.
But you run grant panels with ad hoc and
There's some panels, there's some that are all ad hoc. It sort of varies based on the director a little bit. There's not a lot of uniformity.
One time chemistry had no ad hocs. No panels.
No panels.
It was all ad hocs at one
the last
time.
5 years maybe.
So what's the role of the program director? If I was writing a grant, or a postdoc, or a graduate student was writing a grant, can we contact the program director, or does that person become away?
Absolutely, and there's a question here that basically how can identify which programs are most likely to support the research. Program directors and the associate program directors are really there to help, and they take that job very seriously. So if you have, first of all, the NSF website is loaded with information about the NSF programs, what the various programs fund, special programs, and what they fund. But nothing beats calling up a program director, and you should feel just totally free to do that, and asking them questions, because they're very knowledgeable. They're there to help, and they will help guide you into which program you want to go. Your proposal should go into. Now, having said that, and again, I'm only speaking for the biology directorate. When you can identify a program to review that you want your proposal to go to, But when the proposal comes in, it gets looked at by several program directors to ensure that that's the right program for you to be in. And it's not uncommon for you might want to say, I want to be in cellular biochemistry, and they're going to look at the proposal and say, actually, it probably is better off in metabolic biology, again, based on the nature of the subject and whatnot. So yeah, absolutely feel free to contact the program director at any time.
And just to follow up on that, the other thing you can do is you could go and look at grants that have been funded, and from particular divisions or whatever. And so you can see if your research sort of matches the sort of projects that you can read the abstract, for example, and all of that. So you can see if you think that there's a good fit, it's probably worthwhile doing that before you actually call the program director.
Yeah, one of my own grants had a mix of math, statistics, biology, algorithms, and so there was really a wide range of what I could possibly have submitted it to, and I just contacted the program officers, program directors, and asked them, where should I submit it? And they told me, we settled on one of the math panels, and they said, look, if we need a biologist to read it, we will send it to a biologist. If we need, and then they'll get an ad hoc evaluation of it. There was a question of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just had an actual question about the first part of the discussion. So, I just had a question about the difference between responsibilities to ad hoc reviewers and panel reviewers, because as someone new to NSF, it sounds to me like what you're talking about is that ad hoc reviewers actually read everything, whereas maybe the panel reviewers don't read everything. And can you just talk about that process maybe? Because I guess I'm assuming that everybody reads everything.
Yeah, again, I'm only speaking for the biology director here because the different programs and different directorates are different. But basically in the biological sciences where they do have panels, generally the way it works is within a panel, which can be anywhere, it depends on the number of proposals there are, but generally the panel is set up such that each proposal gets two reads by a primary and a secondary the panel member. One is denoted the primary and one's denoted the secondary person. And then when the panel meets, when that proposal comes up, basically the primary will go over the proposal, will go over the ad hoc, will at that point go over the ad hoc reviews and what they said, and sort of give a first opinion. And then the secondary person will chime in after that as to their thoughts about the proposal, and then it's sort of opened up to the entirety of the panel to sort of discuss that proposal. The primary and the secondary really do have therefore an overly large percentage of the weight of the decision is going to fall to those two. Some people might even argue it falls entirely to the primary, but I've seen plenty of secondaries turn a primary around, by dint of good argumentation. So basically, the primaries, that's how, well, wait a minute, the primaries are talking about the science and the secondaries, and when the whole panel then gets into the discussion, there can be discussions around issues of science, but oftentimes it gets to the question of the sort of the program, the nature of the proposal, does it fit within the program exactly, or how, looking at other proposals that they've had, how high or low might it fit relative to similar proposals that are being reviewed in that session. At the end of this discussion, which that can take 15 or even 30 minutes, then a decision is made about where to put that proposal at that point in the proceedings, and so it gets put up on a board as must fund, high, medium, low, do not fund. The panel will come back to the entire list at the end of the process and then sort of rearrange things. But that's pretty much how a biology panel runs, and that's where the ad hoc reviews are in there at some point along the way in this discussion, but they're generally presented through the eyes of a primary reviewer on the panel.
In math, it's similar. I guess the main difference between math and biology seems that the ad hoc reviewers for each proposal are on the panel. So there will be a panel of a dozen or so people. There will be maybe 50, 60 proposals for the panel, and every proposal gets read in detail by at least 3 people who will produce written reports, and then those reports will be discussed, and then the panel's job is to rank the proposals. If it's the very highly recommended for funding, then you don't have to rank those because those will all get funded. But once you get below that, then they need a linear order on all the rest of the proposals. There's some that do not fund category, which they don't have to order either. But then those, you have to rank the ones that are in the middle to make sure that, you know, when the program director eventually gets to assign funding, they basically say, okay, we have this amount of funding, you can get this one, all right, I can get that one, and then the funding runs out at some point, and they need to have a linear order so that they know they can cut it off there. That's what the panel.
So I will say that in biology director, at least with the panels that I've been on, that the program directors actually have more leeway than that. There's not a simple linear ranking. There's sort of these categories, and then they ultimately can wield their power by saying, okay, this is, you know, in this clump of proposals that's just below the must fund, but this is someone who's coming up for tenure and has done good work, or this is a new faculty, and so they might say, okay, well, I've got just enough money to fund one more, and this is the one that really needs it the most. Sometimes they'll do that kind of stuff.
They actually can reach down even lower in biology and move it up to a fund cap. But when they do that, when the program director does that, he or she has to make a case for why they think, and you know, it's generally, well, didn't do as well in the panel because it was viewed as too risky. But it is a high risk, high reward proposal, and I think it probably, in fact, the biology director, and I think NSF as a whole, encourages trying to find some of the more riskier proposals, which inevitably don't do well in panel, but may be very good proposals. So a program director does have that capability.
In math as well. It's one of these high risk things.
I think it's not, so the mechanics of this are important to understand. Reviewers are kind of the gateway, but they only make a recommendation to the program officers, and the program officers make a recommendation to their bosses, and then it sort of goes up to the whole NSF. So you get these recommendations. Now, at the level of when the program officer, program director makes the recommendation, they usually know their budgets pretty well, and those recommendations are usually followed through. That's sort of when you get the announcement that you have been recommended for funding, and everyone says, oh, that means you got it, but you know, you don't stay up until much later. But the reviewers, when they review, these are your peers, these are your scientific peers, and so they're the ones who have to read it and say, this is really good science, the broader impacts are really good. Program director, I think you should recommend it. But the program director has a much broader view than whether it's an ad hoc panelist or an in-person or a panel panelist or an ad hoc reviewer of what his or her program wants to fund. And they do have more of this flexibility, which is sort of something I'm still learning about from talking to program directors, as it's already been said, do contact program directors to figure out where that line is about how they make these decisions. So part of the point is you need to write your science, find out the right people to review it, because it makes a huge difference, because it is that gateway. You want the reviewers to appreciate what you're doing and not have it go somewhere else, but also get a sense of what that program is interested in funding, because there is this sort of difference. So reviewers have a lot of power, but they're not the ones who make the decision.
Can I make one quick addition on that point? When you submit your proposal, they actually will ask you if you have any suggestions of people who might be ad hoc reviewers. And of course, that's an opportunity to get a name, or don't give them your mother. But, you know, somebody who you think could be a good reviewer, and someone who you don't want reviewing the proposal.
Now, this is an interesting point, because I've had discussions with other program directors about that. They've actually said, don't put too many names down there because I can't use them all.
Well, too many is right. That's right. Yeah, keep it limited. And certainly don't, when you're trying to say who shouldn't review it, don't have a list of 30 people. So you know, eliminated the field.
So does NSF fund biomedical research?
Well, it depends on how you phrase that. So the panels I've been on are, what is it called, chemistry of life process, or is that the name
Chemistry
of
of life process.
Yeah, life process. I think that's it, life processes. And it is sort of cross-director. There's some chemistry and biology both in this panel, and that's probably where a lot of biomedical would fit, although you probably don't want it to be the medical part. So it's a fine line, but it's really the basic science behind that, and some of the broader impact, the scientific broader impact could be, if we understand this, it could lead to future medicines, but that's not the grant, you know, that's much further down. And so it's sort of, if we learn what we want to learn in this grant, it could turn into an NIH-style grant or a strictly biomedical grant. But here we're really interested in this basic question that's not itself biomedical, it's not itself translational, but it could lead to that.
That's a great way to put it. And anything clinical will get bumped. So you can't be so far along in the discovery process to be doing anything clinical.
Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, this is also backing opposite. And so I have a question about putting on names of potential reviewers. And I wonder if you have any guidelines or ideas about what people can I put as the reviewers I want and don't want. Can I put my PhD advisor on there? Or what kind of thought process do we need for that?
Yeah, so people who are too close to you will be eliminated from the running anyway. So anyone who has even the appearance of conflict of interest will be eliminated from being a reviewer or panelist. They will physically be sent out of the room when the panel is discussing your proposal. They'll come back in. Your name will be somewhere on the board, and they're not allowed to comment on it or anything or really even notice it. So listing reviewers don't. So if you're going to list some, the purpose should be to sort of indicate to the program director what areas your proposal is in. So if you list, 3 or 4 reviewers to indicate that, well, your proposal has some statistics in it, it's got some applications to earth science, this kind of thing, then the program director will be able to say, oh, those are the kinds of names. So now I can get some people in related areas. If you list everyone who could possibly review your proposal, now the program director doesn't have anybody that they view as being unbiased. Because if you listed them, maybe there was a reason why you listed them. So indicate the areas with the people, because the program director will recognize those names and will be able to say, now I know what areas, but don't list too many. The opposed reviewers, list an opposed reviewer if there's someone that you know is biased against your lab. I know people who say, oh, this researcher in France, okay, you can maybe not in France, this researcher in some city refuses to let us use their samples of something because they're in competition with us. That's the kind of thing you want to list as an opposed reviewer, if you know that someone's biased. But other than that, opposed reviewer is something that
And it's just, it can't be more than 2 of those.
Yeah,
you shouldn't.
And there's a perception if people are critical that that's a bad thing. Actually, those are some of your best reviewers. It's sort of surprising. I've heard that from several people where they thought, they didn't want to whatever. Program directors will say, actually, it doesn't always work out that way. There's some of the most critical but most thorough reviews.
You actually, in the formation of your NSF proposal, you have to actually develop a list of conflict of interest, but there's very specific rules about who appears on it.
And just following up on the point about the critical reviewers, the reason that they're often so influential is that if they get excited about a proposal, people will listen to them and they will sway the panel and sway the program directors because they know that this reviewer knows what they're talking about, and so they'll carry a lot of weight. Yes, and it really is an issue of can you get someone very excited about your proposal, because each reviewer on the panel or each panelist has had to read a ton of proposals, and they know that out of however many they read, only one of them is going to get funded on average, for example. So really, it's this triage. You have to get them. The panelist has to pick one proposal to be totally enthusiastic about and sell to the rest of the panel. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I don't know what the funding rates are in biology. In math, it's closer to the panelist reads maybe 10 proposals, then perhaps 2 or 3 of them will be funded.
Yeah, it's like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%.
It depends. So the career panels that I've served on, it's been down at 7%. The general math panels tends to be closer to the 20% range. It's higher than that.
I mean, you learn math.
Yeah, math proposals, it takes, not everyone submits a proposal to math. So it's not like everybody just writes up whatever they're doing and sends it in. People really only submit if they think that they might have a chance, and this reduces the pool. So maybe that's why it's a 20%.
Given what you just said about funding rates, could you talk a little bit about, it's very likely that everyone in this room will have to resubmit. So can you talk a little bit about taking the comments that you get from the panel and giving some advice and tooling that to do a resubmission? I know there's just the factor of taking their advice, but then also the fact that sometimes you'll get 2 reviews from 2 panels that then contradict each other. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Talk to the first thing you want to do there is once you've gotten your reviews and you've sort of looked at them and digested them, if you're thinking of resubmitting, talk to the program director and talk, and he or she, you can, and if there are issues where it looks like the 2 reviews are orthogonal to one another, talk to him or her about that, because they'll have insight, having been at the meeting. Now, again, the next go-round, panels turn over, but not 100%. Usually, what, about a third, because they're on 3 years.
Often the ones I've been on have been completely different.
Really?
Yeah.
In math, they get reconstituted every year.
So there's no consistency. It's not like NIH where you've got this set of folks who see every grant every year.
Biology usually appoints you for a 3-year term, so it's not.
It almost never happens that way in math because the grant periods are for 3 years, and so they can only get you on the off years, and people can't do it anyway. The panels really do get reconstituted. Math reconstituted for most of the years.
All the more reason to talk to the program director, because that person is then likely, certainly math is going to be the only person in the room that was there on the first go-round and can help. And if you work with him or her, then they're going to be in a better position to help you by clarifying something that might come up at that second panel meeting.
Yeah, the fact that they were physically in the room when the discussion was happening can really help you a lot. And they'll be able to say, well, there were these 2 comments and they both made it into the panel summary, but the tenor of the discussion was as follows, and they'll be able to tell you this kind of thing.
And of course, if they get to know you, through a series of phone calls, they're going to be they'll generally be a lot more sympathetic.
But you also should, when you write your resubmission, you often, it's best to be right up front about what was criticized in the previous proposal. You say this is resubmission, and here's what the reviewers thought, and here's how I've made changes, and here's the criticism that I think is silly because they didn't understand blah, 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 and I tried to make it more clear in this proposal. You have to just address them straightforward before you even get to the grant itself, or you can stick it at the end, but it's usually better to put it at the beginning.
Can you resubmit?
So for career, there's a limit. I think it's 3. The third time is your last. For general math grants, I don't think there is actually a limit, but there's a practical limit, because if you're really working on this, if you're submitting the same grant over and over, then you haven't made any progress. You'll be wanting to submit. I mean, after you submit it twice, the third time, it's already been a couple of years since you wrote the first one. You won't want to be submitting the same grant anyway in math. It's just it won't happen.
The rule of thumb when I was a program director was if it didn't get funded and on the second time, the first resubmission, it was very unlikely to make it unless there was just absolutely some major thing of that got missed by the reviewers.
Now, for the career awards, which again, or that many of you will probably be looking at in the near future, I do think in chemistry it's also the 3. I think that's still the case. You definitely want to talk to your program director. You definitely do not want to be too discouraged, because as these funding levels go down, they have to prioritize. If this is somebody's last shot, that might get priority over somebody's first submission that might otherwise have been better reviewed. So there is a little bit of that. So don't get discouraged by that. It can be really difficult now to get a career on the first time because of sort of the backlog. So make sure you continue your discussion with your program director, recognizing, at least in many divisions, the program director changes over. Oftentimes, these are people who come in they're kind of on sabbatical and they spend a year at NSF. So you kind of make a connection with one person and then it turns over and you have to start that again. So keep that in mind, and keep it in mind that just because it hasn't gotten funded, if you can identify, if there's a critical flaw, you want to address it. But if it's something where you just have to kind of be persistent, make sure you get that information from the program director. And don't give up and say, I didn't make it the first 2 times, I'm just going to skip it. Because that third time might be really critical.
And make sure that you start early enough so that you don't have to say, hey, so that the tenure doesn't conflict with submitting the career grant again. So, I've had to give advice to people where they say, my department wants to tenure me, what should I do? And sometimes the response is, well, tell them to wait a year so that you can submit your career grant again, or something like that. So start early enough so the career doesn't fight with the tenure.
And start early, oh yeah, there's a question, but I'll make this one comment. Start early enough that you can have senior colleagues read your proposal. They are reviewers, they've been in these rooms, they will give you the best advice. Don't push this. Make your deadline 2 months before the real deadline and hand it around to people in your department and ask them to be really harsh. Because there's no better way of improving your grant than having a seasoned person trash it first so that your submission, it looks like a resubmission, That's, if you take anything from this panel, it's make sure you get people to read it, make some friends and get them to read it.
So.
I have a question regarding this medical versus non-medical issue. So if somebody is really very medical-oriented researcher and then based on publications, the majority of research is really applied and very medical, and suddenly this person wants to submit to NSF something that supposedly is not really medical because makes some interesting observation. I would like to go now this way because it's biologically significant. Is this viewed by the panel in any negative way? Like, let's say they would say, well, this researcher is really mostly medical. Why this person tries to push this basic biological idea? Maybe this person should just continue sending applications to the NIH.
I've seen this happen in my panels that I've been associated with. People do, somebody in the panel will get, this seems too medical. Now, there's another clear example where if you work with a program director ahead of time and ask and sort of get their sense of is this too medical, and they say, no, it's not, then they're liable to chime in at the panel meeting and basically say, we've kind of gone over that with the PI, and our sense is it does fall within NSF guidelines. So you sort of having them to back you up at the outset is a good thing, but yeah, it does come up.
And you can just state it very plainly in the proposal. Most of the work at our lab over the last however many years has been, medically oriented, but we've come across this great discovery that addresses the basic, fundamental science, and so this has opened up a whole new avenue of research for us, and, just be very straightforward about it. It doesn't have to be a dry, impersonal proposal.
The panel does want to know that the PI is capable of carrying out the research. And so they should be able to tell from your track record, from your environment, what you've been doing for the past few years, do you have the wherewithal to be able to do what you're proposing? And I've certainly I saw a proposal, this is true in math as well, I saw a proposal where it was someone who was working on mostly analysis, which was, basically calculus. And they had proposed some connections to work on connections between calculus and number theory. And these are different fields, but there are connections between them. And the proposal was, in principle, it was a nice looking proposal, except that the PI didn't have any experience in number theory. And there was no reason why, there was no demonstration that the PI had the ability to actually carry out the proposed questions, and so it wasn't funded. And similar kinds of things can happen in other fields. You have to make sure that you demonstrate that you're the one to do this research.
I can see, to try and give an example of where you've had a compound that conceivably could be a drug down the road. If you put in a proposal to actually try and understand the mechanism, the site in mice where that compound is acting, that could be a good basic research proposal that would fall within NSF. If you just were screening a whole bunch of compounds to see how they act in the mouse, that could be seen as a little too purely clinical and basic enough. But again, the program director is the person you want to go to.
On a more practical note, I've heard several times the statement that, well, someone needs it more. If you want to go for one of these career awards, if you already have some NIH money, how much is it even possible? Or is that looked at as like those guys are funded?
That question, it doesn't rule out you being funded, but that question will certainly be raised. And at the end of the day, the issue is going to fall is where does your slip stand in the hierarchy? If it's high enough, you can overcome that. If it's sort of kind of further down, and they can fund somebody else who looks like, that's liable to go against you.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing happens even when you're just considering, the ordering between, let's say you have two proposals that were ranked as roughly equivalent in quality, but one of them is a seasoned researcher who's had NSF funding for the last 25 years, and the other one is 6 years past their PhD, and they haven't had an NSF grant yet. Then they're going to do this calculation. Okay, which one is more worth it to the program? Should be given to the one who's really got this proven track record, but on the other hand, has had the advantage of all this NSF funding to get that track record. Or are we going to give it to the young person, see what they can give us if they have this opportunity for the funding. And it's a discussion that will be had, and sometimes it goes one way, sometimes it goes the other way.
I'm just curious why culturally people more call the telephone call program directors rather than emailing, because I think the newer researchers are just not used to telephone call methods, but you guys seem to say...
Yeah, you can email. I don't think it, it's...
Text them.
Complete sentences do help. But I emailed mine, and my entire conversation was carried out over email, and that was nice because then I had it sort of written down so I could go back and refer to it. And then also when people at that level are writing emails, they're thinking carefully about what they're writing before they write it. And so email is good too.
On the other hand, if you're really asking the program director what he thinks or she thinks the chances are that this would be seen as a failure, it's something that's a little bit, they're not going to write that down, right? So they'll be much more comfortable talking about that to you over the phone.
And if you're asking about what the tone of a conversation was during a panel, you really want to be talking to them because tone is very hard to communicate over email. And if you really want to read what the program director is sort of more directly thinking than talking, we'll just give you extra information that really you won't be able to get over email. But a lot of the time, if it's just informational, sort of like look at the content of my grant, which panel, which panels does it belong in, that's the kind of information where email would really be useful. But once you get into these more kind of nuanced things, you might want to talk on the phone.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because otherwise you could end up with this back and forth email string that the program director is going, oh God, it's him again.
Yeah, it takes forever. It takes a long time.
Over a phone, that conversation might take 4 minutes, but over an email, it could be 3 or 4 back and forth. And you sort of kind of...
Some of the best advice I've heard on this topic is start with an email saying, this is who I am, I have questions about da-da-da-da-da. I know you're really busy. Is there a time that I can call you? When's the best time to call you? I want to figure out how to maximize the programmatic relevance of my proposal. So you want them to feel like they are doing their job to help NSF, not, here I am this little guy and I'm bugging you for your time, you help me. It's sort of, you want to help the program officer do his or her job by improving the funding at NSF. So if you couch it that way, sort of a win-win for everybody. That way they get at least some inkling of what that phone conversation is going to be about. It's not just a cold call. They have some time to reflect on it. Maybe you include your abstract or something else, whatever part of it is. That starts that conversation, and then it might be that the answer that you need comes back in an email and you don't need a phone conversation, but it kind of depends on what level of question you have.
Yeah, I mean, telling a program director a month before you submit, saying, okay, I'm going to submit a proposal on the following topic. Here's the outline, and sending the list of all the section headings of my proposal. That actually is information that program directors want and they can use. They're going to have to eventually make a decision about which panel to send these things out to, and the more information they have earlier, the easier it is for them when it comes time to actually distribute the proposals to the panels. They'll have more of an idea of what's coming, and they'll also be able to help you direct your proposal to the right place.
I have a question regarding collaborations. Could you comment on this, like to what extent, especially the extreme case of international collaboration? Let's say I'm collaborating with somebody in France, let's say, and I would like to include this information in the grant, but in what way should I do it? Because this person in France will not be funded by NSF.
You should actually, there are some special programs that NSF has for international collaboration specifically, and that would be one place to start to see if you fit fit in one of those. But they actually do have some set-aside programs for them.
That's true, but on the other hand, if you're just talking about with people you're collaborating with just sort of naturally, usually if they're not formally part of the grant, but would be doing some component associated with the grant, you attach a letter from them at the end. There's a place where you can put in letters from collaborators or people who are going to collaborate, and they say, yeah, I'm writing to say I have heard of this guy. We are working with him, and that sort of thing. That's critical, actually, if what that person is doing something very critical to the project. And you really, in fact, I've seen proposals where people have said they were going to work with so-and-so, going to run a mass spec at so-and-so's, and there's no paper or anything to indicate that they even know this, that the person even knows them. So you really do want to make sure you've covered yourself with that.
Yeah, and collaboration in terms of travel, that sort of thing. NSF, that's a lot of what NSF funds get used for in that, is travel to foreign countries, bringing visitors over to the U.S. to talk to your lab or to your department or whatever it is. Travel is a common expense, and international is fine.
So on a related question, does NSF ever fund international postdocs and graduate students? Do you have to be a U.S. citizen?
I think in the postdoc and graduate student fellowship program, you have to be a U.S. citizen.
That said, there are, if it's viewed as a research component, then the NSF can fund internationally. If it's viewed as an educational or mentoring type component, then it has to be in the U.S. So for instance, at the Statistics and Applied Mathematical Science Institute, where I'm an associate director, we can take our postdocs at SAMC from anywhere, I think.
Yeah, it's also true of an individual grant.
That's right. That's because it's viewed as research as opposed to being viewed as a mentoring thing. So a mentoring thing will definitely be you have to be U.S. because the point of those funds is to sort of bolster the U.S. presence in science and math and sort of thing.
Please talk about the educational component of the NSF career award.
So broader impacts. So
No. So specifically though, for career, it's education. It's not just broader impact, but it's specifically educational.
Oh, okay. But it's couched then. Well, maybe they actually changed it.
I had to read the grant proposal guide again, but it really is. So for career, it's not just broader impact, but they specifically want it to be educational. And that's an important point, but.
Okay, oh, maybe they did. So reviewers on any NSF proposal get two review criteria: the scientific merit and broader impacts. In the career awards, that broader impacts, I guess now is actually formalized as an educational component. So this is new since I've done this, I guess. I'm about to be on a panel coming up, so I'll learn more about it then. But it's very important at NSF. Both of those, that broader impacts too. So we've been focusing kind of on the science part of it as the gateway. But I've been on panels where all the science is fine, and then the program officer who's in the room says, okay, but tell me about the broader impacts. And if it's just sort of, I'm going to take a couple high school students in my lab, and oh yeah, I have 2 female graduate students, and that's all, they'll say, oh, that's really kind of, we need a little bit more than that. And it can start to sink a proposal. On the other hand, I've seen proposals that kind of pass the scientific merit, but they're not, the most exciting thing. So they pass, and they're certainly solid, but they say, oh, but these broader impacts are really creative. And it looks like they're really going to do them. They're doing them. They're not just giving face time to it. That can really help open the result. Now in the career, they're really looking for these 2 components. And so it's even more critical. They will discuss at length that educational component. And as a junior faculty member, you're on this tightrope of trying to get your research going, but now you have this educational component, and you want to try to merge them as best you can and weigh them as best you can. It's really critical to look for this education component that is something that your department will support and sort of helps you, that it's not too distracting from what you need to get done, but somehow is tied in with that. And if you can do that effectively, then it will stand out as, you know, a really good package, because it's not, I'm going to do all this, oh, and by the way, I'm going to spend every Saturday at the Museum of Science, you know, developing these new programs for 5-year-olds. You know, that, oh, it sounds great, but it's really distracting from what you need to do to get your research going. So the best you can kind of align those goals, the better.
That was back in my career grant. That's exactly what the panel said. They said, oh, this educational portion is really well integrated with the research portion, and it was all about, you know, sort of getting in math. The advising structure is very different than it is in lab sciences, and the proposal was just to try a lab science model in math, where you have, you know, a PI and then some postdocs and then graduate students, and have the people sort of talk to each other in a vertically integrated way. But because that was sort of an abstract structure being imposed on whatever research I wished to do, and it was viewed that the field that I happened to be in was sort of a good testing ground for this kind of structure. Although I should say that in the end, I asked for funds to be able to get the postdocs and the graduate students and so on, and then they took my budget and they slashed it by more than a half. And then I had to write a what's it called again? The revised budget. Yes, a change of scope statement. So when they cut your budget, you have to write a change of scope statement. And I asked my program officer, what should I say there? And they said, write a strongly worded statement, because this is the kind of thing that could be read in front of Congress. And basically what my change of scope statement said was, I would like to do this educational program, but you've cut my budget to the point where I simply can't, and you should not expect that I'm going to be able to do what I wrote in the proposal with the amount of funding that I've been given, because there is not enough funding left in this grant to fund the activity that I proposed. So your funding will be cut, that's sort of standard, but make sure that you're realistic about what you can do with the funds that you then end up getting.
And that actually was one of the questions. Should you pad your budget upwards with the expectation that it's going to get cut? Or is that, did reviewers see right through that?
Don't pad it. Ask for all the stuff that you would like in an ideal world. If you would like to have funding for one graduate student per semester for the duration of your grant, say so. You know, it'll come out to a number that's more than you're going to be funded. But there's nothing wrong with asking for it. If you're going to write a budget justification where you say what you're going to do with all these funds and why it's necessary for the project, if you say, well, you know, I have a lab and there's, you know, all these things can be done in the lab, and, you know, I want a graduate student for this and a graduate student for that. If it's reasonable, no one's going to look at it and say, oh, that's completely unreasonable. But nonetheless, they will still probably cut your budget and say, okay, we're going to cut it now. You decide where to take the funds from.
Yeah, but it does need to be reasonable within the context of what you're proposing to do experimentally. So you can't, again, don't pad it.
Right.
Yes,
Exactly.
No, padding is, people will see right through padding. They will respect if you have honest requests for funds to be used for certain purposes. I was requesting funds for postdocs and that sort of thing, and they cut all of it. And, you know, okay, so that's the reality of how it goes. But no one looked at it and said it was unreasonable for me to ask for the money for the postdocs, given what the educational goal was. That was really necessary to carry it out. But then once they cut it, I just have to say I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, if you really pad it, the reviewers aren't supposed to really be talking about budget details in their reviews, but still, if you really pad it so that it's just a ridiculous amount of money for what you want to do, you'll really piss off the reviewers. Yeah. And so they'll, even if your science looks good, they're going to be just angry. It's not good.
So, how accurate does it have to be, the budget?
Sorry?
Say again?
How accurate does it have to be? Like, how detailed do you have to prepare your budget?
That will go through, typically, so NSF grants they don't fund individuals, they fund institutions basically, so you'll be going through somebody in an office. There's going to be administrative help to do that, and what you'll decide on is how many graduate students you want to fund, how many summer, you know, how many postdocs, what equipment you want to buy, that sort of thing, and then you will go and talk to your grants officer at your local university, who will then tell you, okay, this is how much this costs, there's fringe benefit at this rate, and so when you all told one graduate student semester is going to cost you X amount of dollars. So what you want to do is, this is a way to ensure that you're not padding things. Just list what it is you want to fund, just the items, not the amounts. And the amounts will then be determined by somebody else who knows what these things cost. And if you then determine, if you then look at the number and you realize you're applying for a 3-year grant for $5 million, you've asked for too much. So then you go back and you revise and you say, okay, maybe I should ask for less, cut this out, cut that out, and then get a number that's more reasonable, but still, you know, everything that you'd like in an ideal world in that sense.
This is another point where networking is really important. Get your hands on somebody's recent successful proposal, both for the content but also for the budget. Not all places have, so at Duke we have pretty good administrative support to help with budgets, but I've talked to colleagues who said, oh, how did you come up with your budget? Because I don't have somebody, you know, I don't have that office. You know, it's me, I have to navigate the NSF website on my own. Then you really need to get your hands on colleagues you trust who will share with you their recent budgets in your area that would be similar, because chances are yours would go to a similar panel and get the same kind of budget. That really helps to strengthen your network on that.
And in that conversation with the program director, where you're getting to the point, ask them what the range is that the program generally comes. So again, you want that proposal to come in within the standard range of that program.
But is this an information you can find on the website, the grant that have been, you can find the budget?
Yeah, I think that is when you start searching through grants and you can read abstracts, because I think the numbers are.
The total number.
The total number there. So if you want to see what the range of the total grant is, that's there. Individual budget justifications will not be there, but that's really important to talk to your colleagues. I mean, at the University of Minnesota, they've been under a microscope for like 20 years because there was some medical thing, somebody embezzled tens of millions of dollars. So in particular, the budget justifications are scrutinized. My first grant, I didn't put in a line that said I want to use NSF funds to send marked up manuscripts to co-authors. So when I tried to send it was a printout of a book that I was writing with someone in Berkeley, and I tried to send it, and my department wouldn't do it because I hadn't written in sending manuscripts to co-authors as an item in my budget. So now, at most places that wouldn't have happened, but because Minnesota was under a microscope, they didn't want to do anything that wasn't explicitly written. The message you should take from this is that you should make sure to talk to your colleagues about what level of detail is required, and if a lot of detail is required, get the laundry list that they put in theirs and then just put it in yours if it all seems reasonable. There was
In the back, in case you
You must have seen lots of common mistakes that people make, especially early career investigators. I assume that not hitting the broader impacts and merit criteria are big ones, but are there other ones that you've noticed? That
far too much research. First proposals, oftentimes, if you're going to basically, you're looking at 30 years worth of, not 30, but you're looking at 10 years, literally 10 years worth of work. And then the panel's got the problem of knowing that can't possibly be done in, say, the 3-year life of the grant, and not knowing where your priorities would fall. And some of the stuff is a little dull, and some of the stuff is really exciting. So again, this goes back to Kathy's earlier admonition, which we can't state enough. You really want your proposal read by senior colleagues who can give you help in terms of saying there's just too much here. You need to cut it back, and how would you set your priorities? That. So that's one of the biggest problems that I recall time and time again from a first proposal coming in from a PM.
And I see actually the opposite problem, which is people so they've just written a thesis in some subject, and what they do is they take their thesis and they go, okay, what's the next step in my thesis? And they write some very specific problems which don't have enough breadth of vision. And so people will fail to place their research objectives in a context that's wide enough to make it interesting to more than one person on the panel. I mean, there's the one person on the panel who knows this person's research already, but then there's 2 other people who are reading this grant, and they have to ask, they're going to ask the question, why should I be interested in this? Why should anyone besides the PI be interested in this? Make sure that your the motivation the broad motivation is there. So you want broad vision, but then you also want your projects to be specific enough and substantial enough, but yet doable by you in 3 years, whatever it is.
Remember, the first 2 things you're going to read are the abstract and then the historic, sort of kind of the introduction or the historical background, whatever that's called at NSF. And somebody once told me that you wanted to set up your proposal so that by the time they got to the end of that historical, before you talked about anything you were going to do, that they reached a stage where here's a really interesting question in biology that needs to be answered. And then what you're going to do in the rest of that proposal is make the case for why you're the woman or man to basically answer that question, and here's how you're going to do it. So you want to draw them in early, because if the historical background is just a dry litany of review type sentences about trying to show how much you know about the subject, you're liable to just lose your reader right there before you even get to the part that's going to be important.
That's a really good point. There's certainly a craft to review, proposal writing, and it has to do with that. And there's a lot of reviewer psychology. Remember, people have gotten maybe 10 grants that they're supposed to read through, some of them really in-depth, some of them just peripherally. They get in these rooms, they get a little cranky, it sort of depends. Are they waiting to break for lunch, or they just come back from lunch? You don't know when your reviews or when your proposal's coming up. And that those first couple of, there are places in a grant proposal where reviewers are going to go to first. And if you think about it, get your hands on other proposals so that you can read them the way a reviewer would. And what comes out is the information that you need in the right place so that the reviewer grabs it. And that's really critical. You don't want a reviewer to get fatigued or bogged down at the beginning with too many acronyms and very specific details on something. Your reviewers will not necessarily be in your direct field, especially when you get in these biology and chemistry mixed things. All these acronyms get really, the reviewer finds themselves reading a sentence 3 times. Your proposal just drops on the floor and might not get picked up again. So be really mindful of that. Have many people read your proposal if you can, and go to some really good grant writing workshops. Duke has had several. Just George Gopin still do that does. I mean, his isn't specifically about grant writing. It's just about writing, and it's really good. And there are some other ones. There's a NSF and NIH sort of Bibles out there now for writing grant proposals. And there's a reason that people, sort of craft their proposals in certain ways because of the mechanics of how proposals are reviewed, and it helps to fit in that. You don't want your proposal to sink just because it wasn't crafted in a way that makes it easy. You want the reviewer's job to be as easy as possible.
And you really generate enthusiasm.
That's right. Yeah, you're really writing to the reviewers, to the panelist reviewers. I mean, that's your audience, right? It's not sort of an abstract, okay, I'm putting this out there in the ether. You're really writing to a specific group of people who have a certain kind of expertise, a certain breadth of expertise, and you want to make them exciting.
They're not that different from you. So think about, as soon as they read the title and that abstract, they already have something starting to form in their mind, just the way you do when you're reading through titles and abstracts, is what jumps out. So they're either going to be sort of predisposed to like what they're going to read coming up, or they're going to be predisposed to want to get to their next proposal to review.
Yeah.
If they come out of the abstract not really clear about what the proposal's about, you got a problem. At that point.
Okay, we've gone over our time, so I don't want to impose on our panelists anymore, but